Greetings and welcome to today's 10-minute painting lesson. We're going to begin here today, as we generally do, with our large damp square-headed brush. Here I'm using a mixture of titanium white and primary red, and I'm applying that to the base of our horizon. Then I'm slowly beginning to blend that mixture upwards. From there, I'm going to take a mixture of primary red, primary blue, and titanium white, rendering this purple-violet color. I'm applying this on top of our pink, and I'm blending those two together fairly softly. If you're incorporating a decent amount of water in your mixture, the initial application should stay wet for a long enough time to blend it with the new application. I'm also using a very soft touch of the brush, and I'm doing this because if you apply a very bold stroke, you can kind of push the paint to either side of the brush and render something that's much more streaky. From there, I'm going to take a slightly darker mixture of that violet or purple, and I'm going to apply that on top, yet again blending it in softly. This time, however, in the mixture, as opposed to adding a titanium white, I'm adding in a bit of a Mars black instead. It's also worth noting that when blending to mix a purple and you want to use a red and a blue, generally in this channel we use primary red and we use primary blue. However, if you use a French ultramarine blue, it has a bit more of a red in it. It's a little bit more on the purple side naturally. So if you mix that with a red, you render something that's really quite beautiful. Then, as we get towards the top of the canvas, I'm going to use a much more blue-heavy mixture. It's going to be around the same level of darkness, but we're going to just have slightly less red interjected into it. Then, in the very top, I'm going to take a little bit of titanium white, move that in there as well, and this is going to do a couple of things. First of all, it's going to thicken our pigment because titanium white, it's a much more thick pigment. It isn't as transparent. So where you have pigments like primary red and primary blue, upon the first initial application of them, they can kind of be a little bit too transparent. You can see the canvas through, you can see the tooth of the canvas, and that isn't really the best aesthetic. It can look a little bit choppy. So by working in a little bit of titanium white, we can ensure that we can avoid that. We're also working in all of this titanium white to brighten up an area of the sky for our galaxy setting here. Now, as you can see, we're still using that square-headed brush. I'm moving in an X-shaped pattern for the majority of this, just to keep the application fairly random so that it doesn't look like strokes, it doesn't look too horizontal, it's free moving. And then, while it's still wet, I'm going to switch over to my old square-headed brush. This is something that I have just laying around, but you can make your own by taking a regular square-headed brush and peeling back the bristles until you have something that, when dabbed with on the canvas, renders just a great deal of implications, can save a lot of time, and render a sky that looks like it's full of stars in the distance. So as we continue to do that, we lose the brush stroke effect and we begin to get this new collection of applications. And it's fantastic because if you were to paint in all of these stars, all of these little dots, all of these implications with a, say, small round-headed brush, it would take you hours, it would take you so long, but by using this brush, you can just speed up the process so quickly and get something that you're proud of and something that looks great. So here I'm building up the blue in the middle. I'm working in a little bit of titanium white with each application, and we're just trying to ensure that we get this gradient that moves outward, but it's not a soft gradient, it's more of a pattern texture gradient. And the pattern isn't consistent all the way through. We're still trying to work in some inconsistencies, because it's the inconsistencies that are really going to make it look much more interesting and real. It's going to look much more captivating. Even though we aren't going for realism in this piece, even though it's more of a surreal piece, we still want the various elements in it to have realistic qualities, so it doesn't adopt too much of a cartoony aesthetic. So this is a rule that really follows so many different subjects in painting, whether it be trees, mountains, clouds, stars. Try to interject different changes in them. Now, with all of that being said, I'm moving down to the bottom of the canvas. I'm taking a Mars Black, a large square-headed brush because it can hold a lot of pigment, and I'm painting in the ground. Now, I moved it kind of on an angle so that we made the piece a little bit more dynamic. It's more moving. So that's something that's a really easy trick if you feel that your painting is a little bit too still, a little bit too balanced. If you need to work in something that's just a little bit more interesting. So from there, I'm taking a smaller round-headed brush, I'm adding a lot of water to it, I'm adding some titanium white paint, and I'm going to peel back the bristles of the brush and launch some paint at the canvas. This is another very quick, easy technique that's going to render a lot of detail on your canvas quickly. It's also going to make a lot of markings that are so small you wouldn't be able to do it with a brush normally. So it's a quick trick and it does the job so much better than a regular application could have. You can also change the size of the stars depending upon how close or far away you keep the brush from the canvas. So you can really have a lot of fun with it. Now, in my rendition, I kept the stars fairly small because I wanted the attention to be more so on the subjects that we're painting right now. I didn't want the eye to go immediately to the sky and stay there. I wanted it to kind of bounce around and see all of the different things that are occurring in the painting. So that's also a really important lesson, not just in this painting, but in painting in general. Sometimes you need to know when not to add a great deal of detail or something elaborate to a piece because you want other elements of that piece to also kind of come to the forefront and you don't want them to be overshadowed by that initial thing. It's all about balance and ensuring that every piece of your painting comes together in a very cohesive manner. So that's what we're doing, and here you can see that we're painting in the kids. I'm using a smaller square-headed brush. I'm using this with the Mars Black paint, and I love this brush for this type of rendering because it naturally has these very sharp edges, which is fantastic for these smaller little detailed areas. I know a lot of people like to use the smaller round-headed brushes for detailed areas, but when you're working this small, you need something that's much more condensed. As the round-headed brushes, they can be a little bit more feathered, they can leave a little bit more of a soft application, and that really isn't what we want right here. We want something that's stark and that stands out, as these subjects are more so in the foreground of our painting. Now, from there, I'm going to take a medium-sized square-headed brush, and I'm going to begin working on some light in the ground. And I'm doing this just to interject a little bit of depth into our painting here. We could have the foreground entirely in a silhouette. However, I think it'll be much more captivating if we have a little bit of depth in it. If the light kind of starts on the horizon and then rolls back into darkness where we have our real foreground. So that's what I'm doing. I'm doing this in a very choppy manner. I'm trying to make it look like the ground has different mounds, and that way it's going to look a lot less flat and a lot more dynamic. Again, it goes back to what we were doing in the stars in creating inconsistencies to render more realism. It's also worth noting that I'm occasionally doing a little bit of blending here and there just to balance it out. I don't want too much texture, and this is again going back to the lesson of ensuring that one area doesn't stand out too much over another. We're trying to ensure that they are all kind of popping at the same level, and some areas are even subdued to a point. And if you feel that the ground and the texture from it and that tapping motion was too overwhelming, then by all means blend more. It's a very intuitive process and it's going to change with everyone's painting, but it's important to know why you're doing it and not just how you're doing it. So from there, I'm going to take that smaller square-headed brush and we're going to begin working in some grass as well here in the foreground. It's very close to us, so it's going to appear very large. That's simply how perspective works. And I'm trying to ensure that my grass is moving in varying directions, that it's different lengths, that they are different sizes, and that yet again they follow these rules of working in lots of diversity into our painting. We're using the smaller square-headed brush because it does have that very detailed effect, that very sharp edge. We can use a lot of water in our mixtures to get it very, very sharp. It might water down the paint to the point where it's a little bit transparent, but we can always go over that again with an additional layer. So keep that in the back of your head when you're working on this if you find that it's getting a little bit too chalky or toothy. Now we're coming to the end of the painting, and I'm just working in a little bit of additional detail in the stars with my smallest round-headed brush. Now the application of these is even actually larger than the stars that we worked on before, but it's rendering something really beautiful. And with that being said, that really is our 10-minute painting. I truly hope you enjoyed. I hope you feel like you've learned something. If you'd like to learn more, there's a link to my ebook in the description, Acrylics for Beginners. And if you'd like hour-long lessons just like this, where I also show you my color palettes when we're mixing with water, all of the things we don't have time for in these lessons, you can also find a link to my Patreon in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I post every Saturday. I hope to see you next Saturday, and above all, as always, stay creative.